in about 1963, Frito-Lay came out with, pardon me, a collection of dinosaurs that you could get from the packages of multiple, I'll say packages, of Frito-Lay potato chips and Fritos and that sort of thing. And when it's all said and done, I think I had collected like 22. And that kind of started my interest in, this thing isn't working right. There it is. All right. So from that time forward, I had this interest in things like dinosaurs and dragons, and then I kind of grew out of it. Now I'm back into it again. We're going to talk tonight about a strange subject in a sermon, but I think it's a necessary one. Dragons, dinosaurs, and the Bible. About a month ago, I was at Bangs during a Saturday lectureship, and a young man by the name of Peyton Reed, I imagine most of you, a lot of you young people especially know Peyton. Peyton used to go to camp, and I used to teach him, and now he's teaching me. And he had a real good class on evolution. I didn't get to hear this part, but he had a real excellent class on evolution. And so he gave me some of his material. And it's well worth, if you get a chance to hear this young man, I would encourage it. Okay, now why study about dragons and dinosaurs? Well, what does it matter? Why? I mean, this is supposed to be a Bible sermon, and yet I want to talk about dinosaurs. Well, there's a reason for that. Now I'll show you why. There is such a following now of dinosaurs. I would imagine if you have seen any one of these little films that I've got up here, raise your hand, or if your kids have. See, that's almost everybody. Especially the kids. There was one series on training your dragon or something like that that my grandkids loved. Well, this has got some undertones in it that does concern me. And the undertones is that because of dinosaurs and dragons, it is concluded, and by the way, dragons are really considered a myth. We'll talk about that in a minute. But because of the undercurrent that this is a broad scope for evolution, and that if there are dinosaurs, then evolution is based on fact. Okay? And I'll prove that in just a minute. First of all, it matters because evolution compromises the Scripture. As I mentioned this morning, you cannot intermarry evolution with Christianity. You have to have one or the other. A lot of young people have walked away from the church, and a lot of them is because of some of the upper education they received in sometimes Christian schools, but especially in state schools. If it were true that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, then it would lend some support to evolution. But if it can be proved that these beasts lived alongside of man, evolution would be debunked. Now, if you don't believe me, listen to Richard Dawkins. This is what he said. We should be very surprised, for example, to find fossil humans appearing in the record before mammals are supposed to have evolved. If a single well-verified mammal skull were to turn up in 500 million year old rocks, our whole modern day theory of evolution would be utterly destroyed. Well, that ain't going to happen. The earth isn't that old. But here's what can happen. Let's bring these dinosaurs up to a later date. And you're going to find some of the same fossils that he says would debunk or would destroy evolution. Well, let's look at another one. There is an infinite variety of ways in which, since 1859, the general concept of evolution might have been demolished. Consider the fossil record, a little-known resource in Darwin's day. The unequivocal discovery of a fossil population of horses in Precambrian rocks would disprove evolution. That is, if there's any such thing as a Precambrian rock. That's based on like a 600 million or 65 million year existence. Well, I'll look at that in just a minute. How many of you have ever seen the Nova TV specials that's been on television? Ernest Mayr of Harvard said dinosaur footprints side by side with humans, finding them would counter evidence that humans evolved long after the dinosaurs became extinct, and back up the claim that all species, including man, were created at one time. These guys are getting so close. You know, think about this. This whole evolutionary process as a theory came into existence by Charles Darwin going to the Galapagos Island and studying some little birds. And yet scientists have expounded on it. When Charles Darwin himself claimed that it was merely a theory. And now scientists will say it's based on fact. The next thing we want to look at is the origin of dinosaurs, at least as far as the evolutionary game is proposed. If you'll notice, my pointer doesn't work on the TV screen. The middle, the light green, the Mesozoic, is about when dinosaurs supposedly lived. Okay? There's a little T and a little K on the far left of this little image. That's where the big die-off supposedly came. So you're still millions of years from where we are, supposedly. Now, I propose to you that if you find fossils or footprints in the same strata, that's as far as it goes. That they did exist at the same time. Several years ago, when I was in Mills County, a friend of mine had a place that he owned on the Lampasas River. On that riverbed, there were footprints of dinosaurs. A&M had already been down there. They had studied them, and they told him that they were legitimate. In fact, they got it in their records that it was a legitimate finding. They did take a few, not many. They left most of them intact. But I got to see them. Paul was a good friend of mine, and so he took me out there and showed me those tracks, and it was very interesting. But the thing that I kept thinking, they're so shallow. I mean, that riverbed is not that deep. And where these prints are, there was no water. Now, to me, that says they're not as old. And what do I know? I'm just a preacher, except with a little bit of common sense. If they're so old, then how in the world could they find them that shallow? I don't know. 235 to 65 million years ago is a long time, though. If they lived before humans and possibly evolved from birds like they think they did, well then, there's a lot of missing links, not just one. All right. The next one, Dinosaurs in history. The Han Dynasty, 206 BC to AD 220. This little sculpture was found. It was dated and recorded during this Han dynasty. They found this thing intact as it is in this picture. And it is a direct image of this oviraptor, or however you pronounce that. And you can see a picture of the raptor, and you can see the resemblance of this sculpture. And then you've got the skeleton next to it. The thing that really got their attention was the top knot on the head. Okay? If they wasn't existing in that period of time, then how did these people know anything about this thing? The next one, dinosaurs and archaeology. The Ica stones of Peru. I've actually seen one of these. I've seen them. Javier Cabrera in 500 to 1500 AD collected, these were collected in the 1930s. They date back to 500 to 1500 AD. He collected in the 1930s. There's a lot more that were found, and a friend of mine, well, Brad here, y'all know Brad, he's been here. He had one, or has one. And it has pictures of different things, but you see in this one, something looks like a dinosaur. Again, my question is, if dinosaurs didn't exist at that period of time, how would they have known of them? Now, isn't that, 1850, maybe 1859, somewhere along through there, when that European doctor found a fossil and called it dinosaur or great lizard. So it wasn't mentioned as a dinosaur in the Bible, and it's not mentioned anywhere else as a dinosaur until after 1800s. Now, how did they know they existed? Somebody at some point would have had to have seen them. I don't know if you can see this or not. These are polyglyphs. One of them's in the Grand Canyon. The other one belongs to the Apologetics Press. In the elongated circle is a man. I don't know if you can see it or not. On this one over here on the right. That elongated circle is a picture of a man. Down here is something like a brachiosaurus or something of that nature. Here you've got a man and a dinosaur together. Well, I know it's in rock. It's just a pictograph, but still. If there was no dinosaurs back during this period of time that the natives could see, how could they come up with an image like that? Again, somebody, at some point, some human would had to have had seen them if they hadn't, and then described it. Right? Does that make sense? They couldn't have dreamed this. I guess they could, but it would have been an inspired dream. My belief is they existed in the time of these people. On this one, in the year 2000, archaeologist Alvis Delk found this picture of a dinosaur track crossing a human footstep. Now, I understand, folks, some of these findings have been debunked. In fact, I don't use the ones out of Glen Rose because there is some controversy that some of those may have been, especially the human tracks, may have been debunked. or falsified. There are some legitimate tracks, but anyway. But this one was verified by a spiral CT scan to be of the same period of time. Now, what was it that Ernest Mayr said? That if you can find a fossilized footprint of a dinosaur and a man's together, what happens? Evolution is in trouble. I suggest to you, evolution is dead. They just don't know it yet. Well, what happened to the dinosaurs? I don't know. Any number of things could have happened. Asteroid, virus or disease, disruption in food chain, hunted to extinction, could have been any number of those. Now, they did die off, for sure. But we don't know how, and I guess it really doesn't matter. The next one I want to talk about is dragons. I always thought a dragon was a myth. And by the way, you said, well, where's the Bible? Well, we'll fix to start looking at the Bible now. I always thought that dragons was a myth. The Bible changed my mind. Here is an image of one of the polyglyphs. I believe it's at the Grand Canyon. I don't know if you can see it or not. It's pretty faded. But on the right side of that picture, that image, is the head, I believe. No, the head's in the middle. Okay, I apologize. Out of his mouth. You can't hardly see it, but there's some little dots coming out of his mouth, which supposedly represents fire. That other is just part of the wing. Now, fire-breathing dragon is a thing that myths are indeed made of. But I personally believe that they existed. The Bible. Now, we'll be looking at some more of these images in a minute. The Bible. Now, Job 40. Turn to Job 40, especially if you can't read this. I'm only going to use excerpts of the Bible for this. And I want you to remember, the word dinosaur had not been used at this time. Job was during the patriarchal period. He would have been probably a peer to Abraham. Okay? You remember Job wanted to have an audience with God because he felt that he was innocent of any sin, that what was happening to him was not because of sin, and his friends and his wife all tried to convince him otherwise, and he said, well, I won't just talk to God. I want audience with God. And he demanded this audience with God, and then God spoke to him. He asked him a series of questions. One of them is, hey, what about the behemoth? The word behemoth means monster, sea monster. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See now, his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs like bars of iron. In your Bibles, some of them say that he's talking about a hippopotamus or an elephant. Now this is the Brachiosaurus I mentioned a moment ago. The other two is a hippopotamus and an elephant. I don't guess I had to tell you that, though, did I? Do you see in the hippopotamus and the elephant a tail like a cedar? Do you see those little wimpy tails? They could knock a flea off of their backside. They couldn't do it. Well, maybe they could. I don't know. But they don't have much of a tail. Sure, not a tail of the cedar. And look at the way this thing is built, the powerful muscles, the tightness compared to the others. A lot of your scholars now are believing that this is the Brachiosaurus. Now, notice this Anasazi petroglyph. You see it? Doesn't that kind of look like a Brachiosaurus? In fact, look at his head. They tried to capture that head. Look at the tail, the size of that tail. And this is the very image, while ago I mentioned, that had the man in the same picture with the Brachiosaurus. Okay. Now let's go to Job 41. Supposedly people say that this is an alligator. His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. You know, I've seen a few alligators. I've never seen one spewing out fire. Have you? Smoke goes out of his nostrils as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals and the flame goes out of his mouth. That's not an alligator, folks. Now, there's some other places where this guy may be mentioned. Isaiah 27:1. In that day the Lord with his severe sword, great and strong, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing serpent. Leviathan, that twisted serpent. And he will slay the reptile that is in the sea. You know, maybe this Loch Ness monster may not be such a myth after all. I don't know. Notice the Bible calls him a reptile. And of course, one they said the sea, a twisted reptile. Isaiah 30 and verse 6. The burden against the beasts of the south through a land of trouble and anguish, from which, watch this, which came the lioness and lion, the viper, and fiery flying serpent. Folks, that's real. It comes from inspired literature. The dragon is not a myth. It wasn't called a dragon, but that's exactly what they're picturing. Now, here is the image of the dragon. Notice in this polyglyph that there is something coming out of his mouth that I assume is fire. So in the day that this guy scratched that on that rock, he had seen this thing that spit fire. Again, I go back to the very thing I said at the very beginning. If they didn't see it, someone who did see him would have to describe the animal for them, which debunks evolution. It still puts them in the time of the mammals. Have you ever heard this taught in English? In science? No, I didn't either. Of course, whenever I was in high school, they didn't even teach evolution. But now it's almost all evolution taught as a fact. I just want you to remember something that we studied at the very beginning. Remember what Richard Dawkins says and Ernest Mayr. Remember what these guys said. If the mammals ever coexisted with the dinosaurs 500 million years ago, he said, then that would destroy all of evolution. Well, folks, let's bring it up. Doesn't the same stand to be true if after the creation of the mammals and these mammals coexisted with man, doesn't that debunk evolution? Sure it does. Sure it does. The Travels of Marco Polo, the 13th century, concerning the further part of the province of Karajan. In this province are found snakes and great serpents of such vast size as to strike fear into those who see them, and so hideous that the very account of them must excite the wonder of those to hear it. I will tell you how long and big they are. You may be assured that some of them are 10 paces in length. Some are more, some less. And in bulk they are equal to a great cask. For the bigger ones are about 10 palms in girth. They have 2 forelegs near the head. But for foot, nothing but a claw, like the claw of a hawk or that of a lion. The head is very big, and the eyes are bigger than a great loaf of bread. The mouth is large enough to swallow a man whole, and garnished with great teeth. And in short, they are so fierce looking and so hideously ugly that every man and beast must stand in fear and trembling of them. Now, what does this sound like? Doesn't sound like a horse, does it? Doesn't sound like a kitty cat. Whatever it is, it's big and it's mean looking and scary. Well, let's look at something that Herodotus said, or whatever his name is, Greek historian. 450 BC, there's a place in Arabia to which I went on hearing of some winged serpents. And when I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of a water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and is like opposable to the wings of a bat. It has, as you know, the sharpest hearing and keenest sight of all animals. And it hissed and snorted so violently that all were terrified and confounded. It was reported to measure 70 cubits, although it was not visible in all its length, for it only put its head out. At any rate, its eye was said to have been the size of a large round Macedonian shield. Now, I'd like to know what these gentlemen saw, if it wasn't a dragon, or something akin to a dragon. You know, I do not have one bit of problem with the existence of the dinosaur and the dragon, not a bit. In fact, I think there's evidence to the contrary of their but I do find fault in the dating techniques of a scientist. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In order for the creation to be as it is now, He would have to have created a full-grown earth. It didn't take millions of years for the earth to develop. God created it full grown. He created life, plant life, ocean life, animal life, all full grown. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The chicken. God created the stars, the moon, the cycles of time. All of this is an awesome part of His creation. And He created the dinosaur. Well, what about the flood? Well, a lot of them vanished in the flood. And they have found, as it were, burial grounds, not burial grounds, but dying grounds, where there's thousands of fossils gathered together as if they'd been washed in one place. There's several of these across the world. Well, what about the flood? Why didn't they all die out then? Noah's Ark. You say, how did these monsters fit in the ark? Does the Bible tell us that they were all full grown? Couldn't they have been smaller? Or maybe eggs? You know, I don't know. But I do know this. Though a majority of these things, or most of these things, were destroyed, they still existed up until whenever, according to the fossil record. So they had to have been saved. There was no other way to be saved except through Noah's Ark. Now, that's just common sense. The dragon is not a myth. The Bible talks about him. Dinosaurs, there's too much information about them. Too many fossils been found. Too much proof that they existed, even in the Bible. The reason why there's two reasons why this sermon is necessary. Number one, a lot of people, including myself, I used to think, that this was made up. That it was based on myth. That dinosaurs proved nothing. That they had just taken some bones and built these images around the bones. And then filled them in with plastic. Since that time, I've studied it a little bit more. And because of Job and a few other proofs that are archaeological, I believe that they did exist. And if they existed, it blows evolution completely out of the water instead of supporting it. I don't believe it is proven just by men. Now I see it's proven by God. Anyone who would believe the story of evolution recorded by Charles Darwin, or Richard Dawkins, or Ernest Mayr, or anyone else, is believing a lie. And one of the proofs, though many, is dinosaurs. You know, the moral proof to me is a biggie. Where did morality come from? Why aren't we just like the animals? There had to be a supreme being that created us in His image with feelings of ethics and morality. And He also created these animals that were evidently feared. Tonight, again, I wanted to show that evolution is a false idea. There's nothing true about it. And one of those proofs is dinosaurs. You know, some people are afraid to believe in dinosaurs because they think that proves evolution. No, it doesn't. If you believe what the evolutionists believe, yeah. But they're wrong. And there's proof that they're wrong. If they were honest, if they were truly honest, they would have to say, well, they'd have to question evolution with the different facts that they have found out. A trilobite, one of the first supposedly bugs, I'll call them, I don't know what else to call it, that was formed, was found on the bottom of a man's shoe. Supposed to be millions and millions and millions of years ago, before man was even thought of in the evolutionary process. And yet that little trilobite, that's supposed to be millions, millions and millions of years old, was found on the bottom of a man's shoe. Come on now. What does that tell us? That the trilobite's not as old as they want it to be. There's all kinds of proof like that. Why do you think that they don't give up? Why do you think that they still hold to the evolutionary process, even though it's been, basically they botched it? You know why? What would happen to all the money that they fund their studies with? Why don't you ask Dr. Flew. Ask him what happened to him when he gave up the evolutionary thought. He lost his credibility. Even though he made some great strides in the study of DNA, which led him to believe in a superior being. But you see, it damages evolution. They can't have that. They are dishonest when it comes to the truth of creationism. Tonight, I know this is a kind of a strange lesson to bring up and to offer the invitation in, but we're going to do that because we want to give people an opportunity, if they need to be baptized, to come forward and put the Lord on in baptism, be raised to walk in a new life. If you're not a Christian, we encourage you to do that tonight. If you are a Christian and you need the prayers of the church, if you need strength and encouragement, then that's what this family is all about. If you need to come, won't you stand and sing? Is it for me, dear Savior, I forget thy rest? For me so weak and sinful, oh, shall I be so blessed? Oh, Savior, my Redeemer.